Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another preview and prediction video for the 2025 college football season. Up next, we're covering Michigan. Now, Michigan, I ranked last year as the third most disappointing team in college football. On one hand, yes, they did have the solid finish where they upset Ohio State in the last week of the regular season and then upset Alabama in the bowl game. On the other hand, however, there are three losses in particular that I think Michigan never should have had. They lost to Washington, they lost to Illinois, and they lost to Indiana. Now, Washington easily never should have lost to. They barely even managed to make a bowl game. Illinois, maybe you're saying, well, they made the Citrus Bowl. They wouldn't have made the Citrus Bowl if Michigan would have done their job and won the game. And then Indiana. Indiana was a great story last year. I'm not going to deny that. Indiana was a great story last year. But still, Michigan is, as a football team, much better than Illinois and should have won the game. Heck, Indiana got crushed by Ohio State and got dominated in the first round against Notre Dame. There is no reason why Michigan, as talented as they are, should have lost that game to Indiana, but they did. Now, in terms of what you're losing this year, biggest key piece I think you're losing is Alex Orji. He's transferred out. You've also had three people go in the first round of the NFL draft: Mason Graham, Colston Loveland, and Kenneth Grant. Will Johnson, also, you lose him. He's going in the second round. One other thing I want to mention before I get into the schedule is that the fallout from the Spygate, or whatever you want to call it, for Michigan is going to continue to rear its head because there is going to be a two-game stretch where Sharon Moore, Michigan head coach, is going to be suspended. Now, it's going to be in two spots where I really don't think his suspension is going to matter. However, is the fallout from that suspension going to be bigger than just those two games? That's a question you need to keep in mind here. Because, yes, he's only suspended for those two games, but what about the fallout from it? The first game you're playing this year is going to be you're at home, you're playing New Mexico. I think you win that one rather easily. There's nothing really about New Mexico that screams they can beat a Power 4 team. I think I screwed up and said Power 5 in the Georgia video. Bear with me. There's still a lot of people used to calling it Power 5. But Power 4, I don't think New Mexico will ever beat. So I think you're safe and you get the win there. However, the reason why I pose that question of is the fallout from the Sharon Moore scandal, and not Sharon Moore scandal, Sharon Moore suspension going to extend beyond the two games he's suspended for, is because one of the right before Sharon Moore gets his suspension, they play Oklahoma. Now, I think Michigan is better as a team than Oklahoma. But you gotta figure one, that suspension's looming, and it's going to have a looming effect on the team. Is that going to be a distraction? And number two, it's at Oklahoma. Last year, Oklahoma, even though they only went 6-6, were great at home. They won all their non-con games at home. They managed to. The only real team that dominated them at home last year was Tennessee. And of course, you get that big upset over Alabama. Again, I think Michigan is more talented than Oklahoma is. I think Moore is a better coach than what's his name, Brent Venables is. I think Oklahoma tops is a 7-5 team, maybe 8-4. But again, the fact that Michigan has to go to Oklahoma, where a lot of weird things happen, and the fact that Sharon Moore's suspension is looming, I actually think that, and that's also why I posed the question: does that fallout from Sharon Moore's suspension extend just beyond those two games? I think it extends beyond those two games because I think that distraction, plus the fact that Oklahoma is the home team here is enough for you to lose in week 2 against Oklahoma. Now we get into the 2 games he is suspended for. One of them, Central Michigan. I think you win that one. At Nebraska, I really don't know if I trust Nebraska. I think you win this one, so I think you go 3-1 in your first 4 games, with your lone loss being on the road to Oklahoma. Only because I think, number one, it's at Oklahoma. 2, the Sherrone Moore suspension fallout is happening at that point. So I think you lose that one, but I think the other games you're okay. Then you go into your first bye week. Coming off of your first bye week, you play at home against Wisconsin. You'll have Sherrone Moore back by that point, and you will have had a week to get over that fallout, so I think you win that one. At USC, here's the weird thing with this USC game is you're better than USC, but there was a lot of instances last year where Big Ten teams who traveled over multiple time zones to get to their destination ended up losing. Michigan was a victim of that last year when they lost to Washington. We also saw Ohio State lose to Oregon on the road last year. A lot of instances where the clearly much more talented Big Ten team struggled or lost to a team where they had to travel over multiple time zones. And I think you're better than USC. I think your defense is definitely going to be better than USC's defense is. And I think your offense is going to be more than USC's defense. But again, traveling over multiple time zones to get to this game could hurt Michigan in this case. And I actually think you take the loss here. I think you I think you lose here to USC. Again, multiple time zones. It would be one if you only had to travel over one time zone, but the fact you have to travel over 2, I think is going to be the ultimate difference maker here to why you lose to USC. So I think at that point you're 4-2. The good news is you come back home and you're playing Washington the next week. I think you win this one. I think the only reason why you lost last year was because, again, that multiple time zone difference. But this time it's affecting Washington because they have to come to you. There is no excuse if you lose to Washington this year. I think you win that one. At Michigan State, you have their number, and until proven otherwise, I think you win that one. Not to mention they really haven't been good ever since their last playoff run. Home against Purdue, I think you win that one. Purdue is probably going to be one of the worst teams in the Big Ten this year. So I think going into your second bye week, you have a record of 7-2, which is going to put you right in the hunt for probably the Big Ten title game, and I'm pretty sure even the playoff at this point. Coming off of that, you're going on the road to Northwestern. I think you win that one. And then the second part of a road stretch, you're at Maryland. I'm off of the Maryland hype train. We keep thinking Maryland's going to upset some Big Ten team, and they never do. I think you beat Maryland. So I think going into the Ohio State game that you are 9-2 with your losses being on the road to Oklahoma and USC. Now, the final game of the season is probably going to be the biggest game for both of these two teams. Ohio State at this point, I think, is going to be a 10-1, and Michigan at this point, I think, is 9-2. However, Ohio State's lone loss by that point, I think, is going to be outside the conference because it'll be against Texas in week 1. Michigan, on the other hand, they'll be, if there's any hope for them to get into the Big Ten title game, they have to win this game here, and then hope that Oregon doesn't sneak in. However, something very confusing is that, they lost 3 years in a row to Michigan, and we thought it was Jim Harbaugh, but then last year, a clearly superior Ohio State team that would later go on to win the title, no less, went into the horseshoe and lost to Michigan. This year, they're going to Michigan. I think Michigan wins this one. Until Ohio State proves they can beat Michigan, I am not picking Ohio State to beat Michigan. So there you go. I think Michigan this year goes 10-2 with losses on the road at Oklahoma and on the road at USC. I think Michigan could easily win both of those two games and go undefeated. But the whole thing with with the traveling to Oklahoma where weird things happen, and the fact that it's right before Sharon Moore's suspension, and the fact that they have to go over multiple time zones to play USC, I think it affects them adversely. Now, could they end up possibly losing a game we don't expect? I definitely think they could lose the Ohio State game if things go wrong. Outside of that, maybe Nebraska, but I don't really know. Wisconsin, I'm off the hype train, but I'm predicting a 10-2 season with losses to Oklahoma and a loss to USC. But anyway, that is the Michigan video. Later today, the Detroit Lions video is going to come out on the Go Pats 99 channel. I will try my absolute best to have another video later this week in which I cover the Clemson Tigers. But anyway, no guarantees. It may not be until the weekend. But anyway, this is Roll Tide 99. Next one is going to be Clemson. Subscribe to Roll Tide 99 and Go Pats 99. I'm out of here. See ya.